Hey guys, it's Jesse with Team SCG Hobby, and today I'm running a Pioneer League with a tribal strategy that you know and love, Knights. The deck features a slew of 1-drops, like Fervent Champion and Dauntless Bodyguard, while also getting some sweet lords like Inspired Veteran and Banalish Marshal. Finally, we get to play the set of History of Benalia, one of my favorite cards from its time in Standard. But this is enough of the deck tech, you'll get to see some of the games, let's get into the play-by-play. We're going to start round one, and what I'm going to end up playing against is going to be kind of almost a meme deck, what it seemed to me. It's going to be blue-green Biovisionary. I kept a pretty strong hand with some pretty consistent mana sources going 1-drop into 2-drop, also having access to Knight of the White Orchid in case we stumble on lands, but being able to curve into History of Benalia and Banalish Marshal is really going to end up paying off. My opponent Growth Spirals, just hitting a land on their main phase, so that feels pretty good. They're tapped down low, and I draw another History of Benalia, so I'm definitely going to get to put on a lot of pressure here to start out. Worthy Knight is definitely a great card to have to apply that additional pressure, especially whenever you have Banalish Marshal in hand. Making additional 1/1s to help pressure is definitely a great way to run over your opponent. If you didn't catch that, my opponent played a Permeating Mass. At this point, I kind of paused because I still didn't know what I was playing against, and Permeating Mass isn't really a card that I'd even remember at any point. But he's going to block my Worthy Knight with it. It's going to turn into Permeating Mass, and I'm just going to play another History of Benalia. So we're threatening a lot of damage next turn. With a white source, we could play Banalish Marshal, or we can just Boros Charm him, but at this point, we kind of got this one locked up. So once we go to the sideboard, still kind of confused. I do bring in the Abrade. I bring in some Brave the Elements just to try to clear out some guys and push some damage through. I ended up bordering out the Boros Charms because I felt like they were the weakest thing playing onto the board. So we're going to get into game 2 now. I have a 3-land hand, pretty strong, lacking a 2-drop, but we do have 1-drop into 1-drop Brave the Elements. Gets Incubation, and I believe he finds Biovisionary off that. But I'm going to play my 1-drop. We do get the Knight of the White Orchid, so we're really hoping that he gets to Growth Spiral us. If he does, then we'll just be able to play the Knight of the White Orchid and get an additional land. Plays an Elvish Visionary. Well, not Elvish Visionary, Elvish Mystic. We just play a 1-drop, leave up Brave the Elements, and then next turn we can go Banalish Marshal if we choose. But he's going to start taking his turn, and then this is where he casts Biovisionary, and frankly, to be honest with you, I don't know how quick this deck can kill in Pioneer, but I was a little concerned because I did just need to apply pressure, and a 2-3 against this deck isn't the end of the world, but it is a little scary sometimes. So I did end up playing the Knight of the White Orchid. I was trying to sequence my plays as best as possible. I could have played a Lord, but we get to chip some damage in addition to having the Banalish Marshal this upcoming turn. So I do miss a turn of damage, but I am setting up for Banalish Marshals with Brave the Elements. My opponent here is going to play an Elvish Mystic, and I believe he copies it this turn, the Biovisionary that is. So he's got 1 card in hand and only a Jumpstart, so I know that he's going to need at least another clone and to cast the Jumpstart. But we'll play the Banalish Marshal, we'll swing in for some damage, buff one of our guys, and you know, we're just looking to just get as much damage as possible. Something that I note that was of note here is that Brave the Elements doesn't actually affect the Red Knights because they are not white, but luckily Fervent Champion is the only card in the deck that does not apply for, which, see right there, that block ended up, I wasn't able to save it with that Brave the Elements. But now he's going to end up making another Biovisionary. He doesn't have anything else to do, so he's 1 card away, but luckily what we have is Banalish Marshal into Fervent Champion into Brave the Elements. So at this point, we just swing for lethal. He can't block because all of his guys are green. And then we end up getting the 2-0 for round 1. This is a strong start, and it's going to get us into our second round. This round, we will end up playing against Yorion Esper. I can already tell he is a Yorion deck because his library is 80 cards. So I look at the starting hand. I think it's pretty solid. We do have 8 points of burn with the Boros Charms, the Fervent Champion, and the Knight of the White Orchid, which I can cast due to the pathway. Seems really strong, and the Ember Cleave, you know, another land or even another 1 or 2 drop. We're feeling pretty good about eventually casting this Ember Cleave, but we're going to get some chip damage in with this Fervent Champion. That feels pretty good. Just having a Raging Goblin for a 1-drop. And at this point, I'm just going to play the Worthy Knight. Reason for this is I'll be able to get an extra guy in play with my Knight of the White Orchid the following turn, which will allow me to get the Emperor Cleave. Now, he does have a Thought Erasure. Keep in mind, we are stuck on 2 lands here. He takes a Boros Charm, so he's a little bit threatened by that burn damage. So what we would have liked there was probably another land, but the 1-drop Fervent Champion really isn't that bad. It does represent 2 more points of damage consistently if he can't kill off our board, and it does make a 1/1 with the Worthy Knight. So does feel kind of okay. Oath of Kaya comes down, very good against this deck. A Helix that's just picks off a guy, and then he can blink later with Yorion is pretty threatening, and we are a little threat light as of right now. So I am going to start out with just attacking. We're going to swing in for 5, so we are presenting a lot of damage. Not having the additional land is a bit of an issue. It allowed us to go Knight of the White Orchid into Boros Charm, but that's okay because I am leaving a Boros Charm here for a potential Verdict. And then what my opponent ends up doing here is casting a Teferi. So this feels a little bit awkward because I can't really answer the Teferi very well, but I am just going to Boros Charm my opponent, take him to 4. He is just going to concede because we have lethal on board even if he bounces a token. So we'll go to the sideboard now. What we're going to end up doing is we're looking for just cards to be good against control. I brought in the Fiendslayer Paladins because I was anticipating more black removal than I ended up seeing, so they were a little bit disappointing. I took out some of the more expensive lords, some of the other lords as well. I was just looking to kind of get chip damage in because an early Verdict, or even if they have an infest effect, is going to be really devastating for the deck. I do keep a 4-lander, but we are on the draw. I have 2 1-drops and a History of Benalia, and History of Benalia is very good against control decks. We end up drawing a 5th land, definitely not what the deck wants to see, but we'll just play the Fervent Champion to just get some chip damage in, and if we don't have a 2-drop next turn, the Dauntless Bodyguard can pair with the Fervent Champion, and unfortunately, even though it's not a 2-drop, it is another land. So at this point, we are on just 6 lands. Hopefully the History of Benalia can carry out of it, but it's kind of an awkward situation to be in here. So what we'll do now is we have another Fervent Champion. I was worried about potentially another Verdict. I wanted to see if potentially he was going to kill off something on my board, which he was trying to do. This allows me to try to jam this History of Benalia, which will resolve. And it is a little bit more resilient to Wraths as compared to the other Fervent Champion. But he will Verdict our board away. We do get another Knight, and I draw a Lord. So not terrible, but like I said, we are on 6 lands. It is a little bit defeating, but hopefully we can try to squeeze out a little bit of more damage, and then he Verdicts our board. So now we'll play a 2-1, holding 2 lands, pretending like we have something to do, but frankly, this one doesn't end up very well. If he plays a Yorion, we just have the 2-1 for 1, and he's just going to end up drawing 1 card out of it. So it's not the end of the world, but now I'm looking at this Fiendslayer Paladin, and it's kind of disappointing because now he has the 4-5 that it just can't attack into. At this point, I'm really just hoping to draw maybe some cheaper lords, maybe an Ember Cleave, but I've kind of seen enough. Going into the sideboard again, I keep looking in. I think I need a couple different cards for control. Maybe some Chandra, some Gideon, something a little bit more top-end heavy to get value out of in the long game. I look at this hand. On the play, it's a little bit awkward because Knight loses a lot of value being on the play, but it's still a 2-drop that can potentially hit land drops on turn 3. But I'll play the Knight just as a 2-2. And we have double History of Benalia, so we actually have a lot of curving pressure, which seems pretty good. But we'll end up attacking for 2, and then we will end up jamming another History of Benalia. This is, once again, kind of awkward because I really want to play the Knight as well, but I think we're just trying to jam pressure in with History. He does kill my Knight with a Fatal Push, plays a Teferi, is going to bounce my token. Teferi is a little bit of a nightmare for this deck just because he gets a lot of value out of bouncing the tokens and and the lords if he can survive to do so. And once again, I'm trying to decide if I want to kill the Teferi with a Boros Charm, if I want to play the night after, or if I just want to jam History of Benalia. So I end up hitting it for 4 now, just so that way he can't get additional value. And I'm just going to fade a second Boros Charm here. He ends up having another Teferi, so it may have been a misplay not playing the knight previously. But at this point, I'm playing a History of Benalia, just getting some guys in play. I'll end up playing another knight. This is exactly what I was talking about, where it doesn't really get a lot of value on the play, because you don't want to play it a lot off curve just to try to get additional lands. As you can see, we're already at 5 lands, so thinning the deck 1 land is fine, but it's not exactly something we want to play off curve with. But he plays a big Tef. Now we're staring at both of them, trying to jam a Lord. Hopefully we can clear off 1 or 2 of these Planeswalkers. But what's going to end up happening is he's going to have double push, and if you could see, that's in his top 17 cards that he has triple push. I'm even going to double check the graveyard here, and I see all 3 of them. So that's kind of defeating. He's just going to keep getting value out of them, and he plays a Narset. He has all these walkers. The most value we're generating is out of our History of Benalia, so we're just very behind. But we'll untap, try to clear off walkers again, and since he ticked up his Teferi, he will end up casting the Verdict on my turn, and that's all we can really do about this game. Moving into this match, we're going to be playing against mono green walkers, and what I end up having here is a 2-land hand with 1 drop into 2 very strong 2-drops into a History of Benalia, and we even draw the 3rd land to be able to cast the History, so we're feeling very good. Drawing the 1 drop off the top is a little awkward, but we do have Worthy Knight. This will also let us be able to play 2 knights the next turn, even without the additional land from the Knight of the White Orchid. He's going to play Burning Tree, and this is a very threatening board now because he could go Nykthos for his land drop, and whenever that happens, I mean, he's making 4 mana off of his 1 land drop, but he ends up just playing a Hydra. It does kill our Worthy Knight, so that's a little bit awkward, but we are going to play the land here, play History of Benalia because he's stuck on 2 lands, and once again, this is something a bit awkward about the Knight of the White Orchid that has come up. Our opponent is once again just stuck on 2 lands, so we're not getting any value out of it. He will play a Karn. Luckily, he didn't have a Nykthos to Karn into the previous turn, but we're going to just keep generating knights with our History of Benalia, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want to play this turn, because I can definitely Ember Cleave, and playing the Fervent Champion is essentially free to get the Ember Cleave discount. So we're going to ship some at his face and some at Karn. We're just trying to get the Karn off board. So I attacked in such a way that I should be able to, even if I lose 1 guy, I should be able to Ember Cleave something and still kill the Karn. The 2 attacking Karn is kind of irrelevant because, like I said, the Ember Cleave should be able to trample over and kill the Karn. At that point, he's not likely to block. We get a chance to kill something and get some chip damage in, as well as removing his walker. But now we have an Ember Cleave on board. We have enough lands to equip it again. He's going to play another Karn, so it does make it awkward in case we don't kill him, just because we won't be able to equip the Ember Cleave onto something else. But we do have it on a 2-1, so it's at least a respectable body, dealing 6 double strike trample damage. But we do draw a land. Like I said, still kind of awkward because we just aren't gaining any value. So we're going to swing out. He chooses to block because we have a large History of Benalia board. And I just choose to just kind of play these guys just as 2/2s, just because he is at 1. He has to apply a lot of blockers to the board to just survive, which he's going to not be able to do here, and we're just going to be able to swing this game 1. Going into the sideboard, we're definitely bringing in Brave the Elements because the board gets complicated. We're bringing in the Abrade because it kills off his Mana Dorks. It kills off the Sky Sovereigns and other artifacts from the board. And we're going to take out those Boros Charms because the chip damage from them isn't very necessary, and he's not likely to play any Wrath effects in the mono green deck. I'm going to mulligan that hand because it's 4 lands, a Brave, and then the other 2 creatures are a little bit awkward. The second hand didn't feature enough lands, and this one we have to mulligan to 5, so it is kind of awkward. I end up picking a 1-2 drop, putting the red cards on the bottom because we just need another white source, which the deck is primarily, to play this Banalish Marshal. But we do end up drawing another 1-drop, so it's not the end of the world so far, but we draw another Banalish Marshal, so we have a lot of pressure as long as we can get that third white land. But he will play Willow Haven, and I get the Knight of the White Orchid, and once again, it is just kind of awkward in this situation because although I can play it, I really need that third land, and my opponent just does not have the third land for me to get value out of it. Now, if he did have that third land, which he does here, the Banalish Marshal ends up being very, very good. So there's an argument for just playing the 1-drop, leaving the White Orchid in my hand. That may have been the correct call, but what we end up doing is going double 1-drop here. So we have a very wide board into this Gargaroth. We're not going to attack it because one land and this board is very scary and potentially lethal. He hits a Nykthos. He has a very large amount of devotion. He's at a healthy life total, so it's feeling a little rough from this position. But once again, like I said, one more white land and our board is very threatening with this Banalish Marshal in hand. He plays Anissa, untaps his Nykthos. At this point, he's going off. And he has 7 mana now to our 2 lands. He does end up tanking a long time on this decision. What ends up happening here is he does decide to play a Karn in his hand. He does only have 2 cards in hand, but he plays the Karn. He's going to tick down. He's going to get a Verdurous Gearhulk, which on its own, it's just a 4/4, but whenever you have a Gargaroth in play, which is already just backbreaking for a deck like ours, giving it 4 more counters on it, attacking for 10, that's a lot of damage. At this point, I don't hit the extra land. There it is on the top. But, you know, what can you do? I end up deciding that I'm going to bring in the Wear Tear. There are a decent amount of enchantments for the deck, in addition to being some hits for the artifacts from the Karn board. But it is kind of awkward because it doesn't apply any pressure. I do keep this 7. We have 3 1-drops and a Banalish Marshal, so awkward that we have the single mountain in the deck, but any white source off the top, which we do draw, feels pretty good. Now we get to go champion into Bodyguard, suiting up the champion, going to attack for 4. So we have a good aggressive start. What we're looking for here is something like a Brave the Elements off the top to just keep pushing damage through. What's really rough here is he's going to go Emissary into Haven. So his devotion is at 6 by turn 2 here. We do play the Banalish Marshal. At this point, I'm just trying to swing so that way I can remove some devotion from the board. As I swing here, he's sort of tanking on some of the blocks. He does end up blocking, I believe, the 4/2, but it still doesn't feel great knowing that we have him down to 11 and he still has a ton of devotion to work with. So we do have a 1-drop, hopefully a 1-drop. The Fervent Champion and the Lord off the top could get more damage, but he's going to play Gargaroth. So we do get to double spell here, play History of Benalia and Fervent Champion. So we have a lot of pressure, but the problem is we just can't get enough through this Gargaroth. So I'm looking for a land potentially to activate the Sheffet Dunes, a Brave the Elements, just something to get chip damage. But once again, it is very awkward having these Fervent Champions with the Brave from the board. He plays the Nissa, able to untap his Nykthos, producing a ton of mana. He plays a Karn, and this is where he gets the Sky Sovereign, which Sky Sovereign is a beating against our deck. He has the Nissa lands that are able to crew it. It being able to shoot our Lord and really nerf the board, it puts us very far behind. And even just another swing with this Gargaroth is going to put us behind. Just having the 3/3 beast to block is just so much. And here, again, is Knight of the White Orchid, terrible draw. This is a matchup that I'm feeling pretty good about. This one is going to be against Boros Burn. Something that I really like about this matchup is that we can actually apply a good bit of pressure. We have some good chip damage early on, and History of Benalia applying a ton of bodies to the board is kind of hard for them to deal with all of them, especially if we get some Lords in the mix. The one issue we could have is if he's playing a ton of Shocks, and lightning strikes to kill off our board. But at the same point, if he's doing that, then those aren't going to our face, and we can just really kind of get that late game grind with things like Ember Cleave and History of Benalia. Now we have a strong start here with Fervent Champion and Inspiring Veteran into History of Benalia, while also drawing Benalish Marshal. So this is a ton of early game pressure. We can cast all of our cards. We have 2 Lords and a very good aggressive 1-drop. Now, even though he has this Eidolon, we have so much early game pressure that it's almost a hindrance to him, where going forward, he's not going to be able to cast his spells, profitably. So he is going to trade off that Eidolon, and, he is going to get rid of one of our Lords, but we get 2 guys out of the mix, and that's a very good exchange, given the fact that, there's going to be a lot of 1-for-1ing happening in this game. So what we end up doing is casting the History of Benalia, after combat, of course, and we're going to threat Ember Cleave. We obviously don't have it. Take a little bit of damage from that Eidolon, but we have such pressure right now, in addition to having the Shephet Dunes the next turn. Now, I wanted to hold the pathway just for information, but now that we have the Dunes online, we're just going to put this pressure through. If he had something for this turn, which he does, yes, the Lightning Strike, we're still putting through a ton of damage. In fact, what ends up happening is we're going to attack. He takes some damage from his Eidolon, and, we push him down to 4. We have History of Benalia still on board that's threatening to go off next turn, and he has to answer our entire board just to survive, which he's not going to be able to do. So we're going to go to the sideboard. We're going to bring those Red Cap Melees and Fiendslayer Paladin. Fiendslayer Paladin, an absolute house in this matchup. The only thing that's really strong against it is going to be Chain to the Rocks. We're taking out Boros Charms and Inspiring Veterans. Inspiring Veterans are most vulnerable to most of the removal in the deck. And Boros Charm, we don't need essentially that random burst damage. We're just looking to try to apply threats to the board and overwhelm them on board. Now, very strong hand, even better with the Inspiring Vantage, so we don't have to get awkward with our pathways. But we're going to go 1-drop. We do have the Boros Charm, which you'll see in this game, it does get a bit awkward because it doesn't do a whole lot. It can get double strike to a creature to potentially trade, but it feels awkward because right now I'd really just rather have a 2-drop creature. So maybe the Inspiring Veteran is better in this matchup. It's very tough to say, but it pays off a little bit here because he is going to cast a Boros Charm, deal damage to me, buff his guy, and I am able to cast my Boros Charm, give my guy double strike just to trade. So it's an okay trade-off there. It does feel kind of awkward just because of the application of Boros Charm isn't one that you would normally expect. But I am going to play the Fiendslayer Paladin. I'm feeling really confident on this board. And the exact thing that I'm afraid of is going to happen here. It's going to get Chained to the Rocks. It's really the only card in the matchup that's going to be something threatening to Fiendslayer Paladin. Otherwise, he's going to be able to hold that board off for who knows how long. But we play History of Benalia just to try to get a blocker out there. It's going to end up not mattering. He's going to just swing in, cast a spell, and we're just in a bad position. So he gets this game. We're going to go to game 3, and I look at the sideboard. Nothing else I really want to change other than bring in 2 more Brave the Elements, other than the Inspiring Veterans, and that's just to potentially have a cheaper way to save my guy. But we take the play. Very key in this matchup just because, like I said, we want to play to the board. We want to be able to apply that pressure. And this hand is a little awkward because, it's all over the place with mana costs. No 2-drop yet, and then having the Ember Cleave is kind of awkward. But the plus side is having the History of Benalia tokens in addition to the pressure that can be caused from the Fervent Champion and it buffing the tokens. It does set up for a potentially big Ember Cleave turn. These tournament grounds can get a little bit awkward, and that is where I have to play the Sacred Foundry tapped because they are not able to cast these History of Benalias despite the fact that they do make knights. They will not be able to cast the Saga. So just hanging on to them. They do fix mana pretty well for Ember Cleaves. But mana typically for this deck hasn't been a huge issue in terms of mana cost since the red splashes are pretty light. But, we're going to keep spitting out tokens with History of Benalia. We draw a Lord. Very good draw. But I tank a little bit here if I want to apply pressure with the Lord, or if I just want to keep jamming tokens, because we do have a big turn next turn. And what I decide is, if my board stays alive, I'm able to go attack with 4 guys after playing my Lord and still being able to cast Embercleave in the same turn, and that is a very huge turn. But unfortunately, he is going to start clearing off this board, and this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. He does use a Searing Blood for one of the creatures, so it's kind of like a Searing Blaze, but he's cast 2 other burn spells now that could go face that have just cleared the board. And then he's going to do it once again on my Fervent Champion. So he's down to 2 cards in hand. Keep in mind we have 3, but they're pretty powerful considering the fact that we still get to make a Knight from the History Benalia. We're going to get to play a Lord, and we're still holding on to an Embercleave. And that's not even counting the fact that next turn we have this History Benalia going off, assuming he doesn't kill off this board. So he's going to chain the rocks, and that is a little bit annoying here because we're not going to be able to do any blocking, or he's going to get some damage in with this Soulscar Mage if he'd choose. But once again, we're threatening 10 damage just from this Knight token in itself. He adds Luris to hand. We get a worthy Knight, and like I said, we have a lot of pressure coming across this turn. And that is why I choose to not play the Worthy Knight this turn, because we're threatening. We're not actually just threatening. We're dealing 10 damage with this Embercleaved token. And what's going to end up happening is it will lose the buff, but this thing is still a 3/3 Vigilant Double Strike Trample creature, and it's threatening just in the face of this Luris. So what ends up happening is I'm still just threatening chip damage here because I'm forcing him to block every turn. He is able to get his blockers back with this Luris, but right there, we trampled over for 4 damage, and we're casting the Worthy Knight, so anything off the top is going to generate more bodies for this Embercleave. It's going to threaten more pressure, and him hard casting this Light Up the Stage for 3 feels really good. It's letting us know that he's pretty desperate. So he plays the Pyromancer. It's going to deal 2 to us. We're still at 10, feeling very good with this Embercleave. Plays a Soulscar, and we draw a land off the top. I tank on whether I want to attack with this Worthy Knight or not. I'm just trying to do math on if he blocks it or if he just takes trample damage. I decide I'm just going to swing with both, because even if he tries to gain life from Luris, he's probably going to lose his whole board no matter what. And he just realizes that there's no good blocks there, and we win that game. Before we even start this game, I just want to apologize to everyone about this round. My opponent ends up, I think, going AFK for a bit, so it gets a little sloppy in terms of where we get at with gameplay. He ends up being on the 5-color Niv deck. I have a couple Lords early on, and a Boros Charm drawing the Embercleave, so we do have a good amount of pressure, but what he's going to end up doing is playing a Sylvan Caryatid. Pretty good blocker against us, except for the fact that we're able to push through with 2 Lords. So sometimes we are able to bust through if we do get our Lords, but we do play a lot of 2-power creatures, which makes it awkward. The other thing about this matchup too is Solar Blaze is very good against this deck, as opposed to something like Verdict, which would kill off his Caryatid, because now he still gets to keep his blocker. He's going to be able to cast this Nicole Bolas, which I totally forgot that card even existed when it was cast against me, and I'm going to hang on to this Embercleave in case I can do something with it. And it's very awkward because if that's an untapped land, I'm able to at least attack in and cast it, trade off with his Bolas at least. But now that he's playing Teferi, this game's basically wrapped up. So going to the sideboard, I should have boarded in Rolling Vortex here because they do play the Bring the Lights, which I did forget about. So I do board in the Brave the Elements just in case of Solar Blazes or something like Sweltering Suns or Anger. I board out these Knights just because he does play like the Sylvan Caryatid dorks, and plus we are on the play, so they just do lose value. And this one, I mulliganed a hand that just was kind of threat light and land heavy, and that one, just had no lands to do anything. So I'm going to mulligan down. We're going to keep a 1-drop of Boros Charm and a Lord, and this is where things get a little awkward and it might get choppy here. My opponent goes AFK for a little bit. We're going to cut back and forth here just between the time stops. but I'm going to attack in with this 1-drop. I'm going to play a land, just leave up Boros Charm, and we're just going to be able to, once again, just chip in some damage. At this point, I'm a little bit just distracted just for how long time's taken, but I am going to be able to play the Lord here, hopefully draw either a land or another 1-drop, so that way I can go Boros Charm Veteran or Veteran 1-drop. But we're holding this Banalish Marshal who's going to kill the Fervent Champion, so we at least have a 3/3. It is going to be able to hit for 4 next turn, potentially, with this Inspiring Veteran. But we are threatening a lot of damage as long as we can keep some pressure in play, and that's just what's kind of key against this Niv deck, is there is just a lot of removal. They've got a lot of very good Wraths against our deck. The one thing that is a saving grace is that we are able to kind of hit them on their stumbled mana, which right now, if you look, they have Temple Garden and Watery Grave. Very painful mana base against a tribal deck that, you know, really wants to be pushing damage through with its lords. But once again here, the opponent is tanking a little bit. As you can see, we actually have the game speed ticked up, but he's going to Dreadbore our guy. Play another Lord, don't hit a land, don't hit a 1-drop. Kind of awkward once again because we're tapping out for the 3-drops, and it's not something that we're getting additional value out of like History of Benalia. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave up this Boros Charm in case he tries to kill it mid-combat. He doesn't. I'm going to play the 1-drop and leave up Boros Charm because I don't want to get Wrathed here, and I think the additional damage, even if we don't draw a land, just push through next turn, is going to be good. But this is something where I realized that I should have boarded in the Roiling Vortex, because I actually forgot this card was in Pioneer, Bring to Light. So he's going to search for Shadow's Verdict to be able to cast for free. Gets a little awkward because we couldn't use the Boros Charm. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the Inspiring Veteran, and I have the Dauntless Bodyguard that I can use as a pseudo Boros Charm to keep my 2-drop alive. So this turn I'm at least, unless he is exiling my board, able to keep one guy alive. He's going to kill my Dauntless Bodyguard. I'm just going to sacrifice it so I can keep the 2/2 protected. And then what I end up having next turn is the ability to keep this Boros Charm up. So he does that, still has 3 cards in hand. So he does have a lot of action going on in comparison to just our Boros Charm and our 2/2. What he ends up doing here is playing a Nahiri. Kind of annoying for us, to be honest. What we end up doing is drawing a land here, and I am just going to kill off this Nahiri by sending the Boros Charm and the Knight to it. So not an exciting play. Kind of not what you want to be doing when you're behind, but if I don't get it off the board, I'm never attacking with my 2/2 again, because he's going to just exile it next turn. He's going to be filtering to some haymakers like Niv or Bring the Light or any of his other walkers. So it's just something that we need to just remove since we have nothing else going on. If maybe we had some more pressure, a History of Benalia or something in hand, maybe we don't remove it just because we want to be applying that pressure. But he is going to cycle land. That feels pretty good for me because that makes me think that he doesn't actually have a whole lot going on. And we're very close now to being able to get this Ember Cleave in. That's going to be just hitting for 6 with our one guy. And if we hit a land, you know, we've got a 2-turn clock here. It's a lot of pressure with just a single creature. Ember Cleave has been very good in our games where we've had it. In fact, here I'm able to just attack in with it with the Knight, Ember Cleave the Knight, and then we're hitting for 6 here. He just doesn't have an answer for it. So Ember Cleave, you know, you got to believe in the Cleave. Right here, he has a Sylvan Caryatid, so he's going to be able to block, live for a turn. Just to try to keep the guy alive, I'm going to just bond it here to make sure that if he has instant speed removal, he's forced to use it. But, I mean, he's going to go to 1. We have 2 blockers, so even if he would play one guy, we're able to just swing in with both, and, you know, he's just going to pass. I'm not even going to play my guy in case he has some sort of instant speed removal or Wrath. He's going to Abrupt Decay the Knight. I say that's fine. Take 2, and that's game 2 that we win. So, as you can see here, I do board in the Roiling Vortexes because I realize that they are better. And then I do board some of the Knight of the White Orchids back in, just because we're going to be on the draw now. Although they are a little bit awkward because of things like Sylvan Caryatid, He can't really fumble on his land drops if he wants to win, just because he does have a lot of expensive and a lot of very awkward mana costs. So although he is playing things like Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay and Dreadbore, a lot of those cards, you know, even when you get to things like Teferi, the mana costs are very strict, that you're not going to be able to get away with that unless he's playing a lot of, you know, early game Triumphs. And if he's playing early game Triumphs, we might be able to get enough chip damage in that, you know, he's going to be too far behind, that regardless if we're getting an extra land drop, we just have too much pressure. But I'm looking at this hand. It's a 1-drop into a Lord or a Roiling Vortex into double History Benalia on the draw. This, other than swap the Knight, the Venerable Knight, out for like a Fervent Champion, this is probably the best hand we could ask for as long as we draw that third land. So I was feeling really good going into this game. But we're going to start out with a Savannah Lion. We actually draw another one, so even if we kind of get an awkward draw, or if we don't draw another land, we could double 1-drop the next turn. I have this Knight of the White Orchid. I'm definitely hanging on to it because I want to make sure that I can get an additional land off it, since we haven't hit one yet. But we're going to play the Roiling Vortex just so that way we can ping and apply a little bit of pressure. Something that I really like here, he's going to Abrupt Decay it, and that feels really good for us because he's using that on something like Roiling Vortex and not something like History Benalia, which is going to give us way more value in this matchup. So he's going to play Sylvan Caryatid. A little bit annoying, like I said, on this board because we have 2/2s, but luckily we do have the Lord. And here I'm tanking because I really want to play this land, potentially go like 2-drop, 2-drop, but I'm trying, I can't really figure out if I want to be doing that or just playing this other History Benalia. So I am going to see if my opponent plays another land, just play the second History Benalia because it's still a lot of pressure this next turn just playing the 2-drop Knight, the 2-drop Lord onto this board. So we're going to get a huge board. We're threatening 15 right now. So I'm going to play this Lord from my hand, attack with everything. He just chooses not to block here. I pause on damage to make sure, and we just have the Boros Charm for lethal here, and that's the best way we can draw it up for the 3/2. So how did we do? We won against one of the top decks, powered through some awkward deck choices and mana bases, and then we lost to some Haymakers. Going forward, I think I want some Declaration in Stones for Gargroth. The card was such a house, the moment it came down, it was just unbeatable. I also want something like Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. He does everything we want to do against control. Buff our board, be a threat in himself, and just spit out more knights. That's exactly what we want. But regardless, this was an okay start to a tribal experiment that I've been looking to really just dive into. Anyway, that's all for today. I'm Jesse with Team SCG Hobby. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you around.